The interest and positive feedback I got from my fan fiction to original fiction video has been overwhelmingly lovely, and I want to first thank all of you for that. It's been absolutely wonderful to know that that topic resonated with you and is helpful. I know it was something that when I first started, I wish existed, and so I'm glad that me creating it is something that worked with everybody and was something that was needed and there was interest in it. So in that spirit, I'm going to do a little series of videos, and I'm going to go in depth into how I changed a fan fiction novella that I wrote into an original novel. So how I expanded it and how I replaced characters and all of that. So if that sounds good to you, I hope you'll hit that like button, because I want to spread the word to all of those amazing fan fiction writers out there that want to break into self-publishing and have that fan fiction story that they think could really make a difference. I'm Elaine Canyon. I started in Harry Potter fan fiction, but now I write romantasy comedies, and I make videos to help other authors with discovery writing, self-publishing on a shoestring budget, cover design, and now on how to change your fan fiction into an original story that you can then turn around and publish. So to start, and I will probably say this in all of my videos about changing fan fiction to original fiction, you won't end up with a story that works by just changing all of the names. That won't go anywhere. There are very few exceptions to this rule, and usually those exceptions are stories that have been written so far away from the fan fiction that it's not really even fan fiction anymore. It's usually just stealing somebody else's world, and all they've had to do is scrub the serial numbers off the world. So personally, when I was starting to try and shift away from fan fiction and into original fiction, I found it so much easier to start with a story that already had good bones and was something that I knew people liked. Taking a story that is a fan fiction and transitioning it to original fiction just felt less intimidating than a blank page with characters and a plot and a setting that at the time I knew nothing about. So when I say that you're going to do a complete rewrite and a complete overhaul of whatever fan fiction story you want to shift, don't let that deter you. Let that be what pushes you forward and lets you know that you're getting started in what I found was the easiest way possible. And the benefit being that as you learn how to do this, it actually gives you so much more confidence for that blank page when you start writing original fiction. You have a better idea of how a story is built, how characters are built, and how a world is built, a setting is put together, and it doesn't feel like you have no idea what you're going to write. It kind of takes away that fear of the blank page for you. Now, in my last video on fan fiction to original fiction, I explained that there are 3 things that you have to adjust. You've got to scrub the serial numbers off of the characters, the plot, and the setting. So in this video and the one after it, we're going to focus on characters. Why am I starting on characters? Because as a discovery writer, character is what drives everything for me. When I write, character is what drives plot. It's part of what drives the setting. It's part of what drives all of the subplots. Everything revolves around what my characters do and what they would or wouldn't do in the story. So because that's easier for me, we're going to start there. So let's dive in. When you're writing fan fiction, you've either used someone else's characters or you've put your own characters into the story in a way that they'll function in the original plot or in the original setting. And regardless of how you've done this, whether it's with original characters or whether it's with taking someone else's characters, you're going to have to make changes and sometimes even cut characters out. But we'll talk about cutting characters in the next video. In this video, I just want to talk about the first 5 things that you'll do when you're changing characters from fan fiction characters into original characters. So the first thing, and this goes for everything, but I want to make sure that we address it heavily here with characters, is you're going to give the source material space. You want to give whatever fanfiction material you were writing off of a really wide berth. Lots of distance between you and the original material. So whether you've written an AU story or a they lived story or a what if in the plot line or a different timeline, whatever it is your story is, you want to make conscious decisions to take you further away from the source material and your fan fiction rather than staying closer to it. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to get rid of everything. If you do that, then you're going to break your story entirely and you've got a brand new story anyway that has no tie back to the fan fiction that you wrote. That's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to take conscious steps away from the fan fiction while staying true to the essence of the story that you've already written. And we're going to keep talking about that here. But to give you an example, if you watch that first video about scrubbing the serial numbers and converting fan fiction to original fiction, and if you haven't watched that, in the cards, you should watch that. I talked about how I took a Harry Potter AU fan fiction novella that I wrote, and I shifted and expanded it into an original novel. And the working title of that fan fiction and the original novel was Pirates. So in Pirates, the fan fiction, I did my best and went out of my way to keep as much of the source material as I possibly could, even though it was an AU. I included characters, I based backstory off of actual backstory of the characters in the fandom, everything that I could do to tie this back to the Harry Potter story and the Harry Potter fandom. I went out of my way to do that. In Pirates, the original novel, I threw tons of it out. I cut characters. I deliberately pulled my backstories away from the original character backstories. And you'll want to do similar things. The goal is that anyone who picks up your original work, the thought process is, this was an amazing story. Not, this story reminded me a lot of, insert your fandom here. Okay, you don't want them to pick it up and go, that felt a lot like a Harry Potter story, or that felt a lot like The Last Airbender, or that felt a lot like Twilight. Whatever your fandom is, you're going to want to make sure that at the end of the original book, it feels like an original book. It doesn't feel like somebody just changed all of the names in a Harry Potter fan fiction, or just changed all of the names in a Lord of the Rings fan fiction, or a Star Trek fan fiction, whatever it is you're writing it. That's our goal. That's what we're doing. So with that guiding principle at the forefront of your mind, let's talk about changing characters specifically. So number 2 is you're going to stay true to their soul. You want to identify those personality traits, the moral compass, the motivations and goals of your fanfiction character. And these core elements, they should be preserved. You don't want to lose all of them entirely as you move into this new character, because if you do, then you're going to, like I said, you're going to break your plot, you're going to break your setting, you're going to break a lot of things in the story because you'll change the reason that the character is moving and functioning. Take Harry Potter. One of his core character motivations is loyalty to his friends. In my conversion from Pirates, the Harry Potter fan fiction, into Pirates, the original novel, I needed to keep that. His loyalty is very important in the way that the story moves forward and functions. This isn't going to work if I don't have loyalty as a core character motivation and goal for this new character. Now, obviously, there are things that you're going to throw out. Harry Potter is impulsive and he doesn't trust easily. Once he does trust, he's incredibly loyal, but he doesn't get there quickly in any way, shape, or form. Those are things that I did not need at all in my new character. Those were things that honestly made it harder to write the fan fiction because I had to work around those parts of his character. And being able to throw them out made it so much easier because I was able to give the new character different things that helped me move the plot forward. And when I talk about the new plot, we'll talk about how that can adjust and affect, and that your new character kind of helps you create a new plot. So when you're looking at a new character and you're transitioning away from the character that you borrowed in the fan fiction, you're going to want to identify the parts of the character that need to stay, or if they leave, the story falls apart. And taking that hard look at the basis of your story is actually going to teach you a lot about character motivation and about story structure as far as how characters affect plot. So you're wanting to stay true to that essence of the character. You're wanting to keep that soul there and intact and moving in the same direction, but you're getting rid of anything that is going to keep the character too close to the source material and anything that might make it easier for you to write a new story. So number 3 is we're changing the past, but we're not changing the past. So this is backstory. You need to rewrite the characters' backstories, but it has to be kept logical in that it will still lead you or your character to the same core values that you kept as we tried to stay true to their soul and reinvented the characters' motivations and goals and values and moral compass and all of that. So you'll want to avoid direct parallels with the story you wrote for the fan fiction, but you want to keep those elements that influenced their moral compass and their motivation and everything. So to continue with my example from my Harry Potter fan fiction, Harry Potter grows up isolated, neglected by the people who are supposed to be his family, and all of that builds his character to have a fierce loyalty to those people who do show him love and affection and acceptance. I needed that loyalty in my new character. That was important. But rather than having my character grow up isolated and neglected, I have him growing up on a ship surrounded by pirates who are as thick as thieves and loyal to each other and no one else. He develops that fierce loyalty that I need him to have for the plot to keep moving forward and for the story to still work and function. But I made it happen in a way that is completely different than the way it happens for Harry Potter and the way that it continued in my fan fiction. The 4th thing that we're going to talk about is defining strengths and flaws. So now that you have the soul of your new character and you have a brand new backstory that has been completely redefined and hopefully keeps you a little bit further away from the source material, because we're always coming back to that. We want to make conscious decisions to move away from the source material. This is how we scrub off serial numbers. You need to remember that you have a brand new character with a brand new backstory. And that is going to change what their strengths and their flaws are. Because your character from the fan fiction, their strengths and flaws are built off of what happened to them and their motivations and how the backstory affected that and what their moral compass is and what their values are. All of that impacts their strengths and their flaws. Well, you have a brand new character with brand new motivations and a brand new backstory. How does that affect their strengths and their flaws? So what unique abilities did they gain out of this new backstory, and what specific failings did they get out of this new backstory? They do not have to be night and day to what you already put together for the fanfiction character. They can be very similar, and there's not a huge problem with that, but you want to just make sure you're being true to the character because now you have a new character. So there's a high probability that those strengths and weaknesses are going to change. So to go back to the example of my Harry Potter fan fiction, Harry Potter in the fan fiction follows his character in that as a teenager, he is awkward around girls and lacks confidence. In my original story for Pirates, I have aged him up significantly and I have changed his background and his backstory. So rather than my main character being awkward and lacking confidence around women, now he knows his way around a suave line or two. He is far more streetwise, or sea-wise, I guess is the right way to say that. And so it changes the way that he interacts with the women that he meets because he's not Harry Potter anymore. He's a brand new character with new backstory, new motivations, new goals, and the way that he functions is different than it was in the fan fiction because he's a new character. So you'll want to take a hard look at what your new character's backstory is and their new soul, their motivations, their goals, their moral compass, what they see as their identity, and determine what their new strengths and weaknesses are. Our last one that we're going to talk about today, number 5, and we will have 5 more in the next video, but I didn't want this video to be epically long, so I'm just doing the first 5 in this video. We'll do the next 5 in the next video. So number 5 that we're going to talk about is internal conflict. Now, the external conflict or the struggles that your character faces should be same in spirit. They should, and we'll talk more about that when we get into plot. But for the most part, you're going to want to keep them about the same as far as what the stakes are and what those pressures on your character are and how that affects them. Because those external pressures are going to play a part on what their internal conflict is. So you'll want to identify what's the basis that's going on in these external pressures? What is the core I'm getting to? And then be able to move forward with that as far as what the character's internal conflict is. So for the Harry Potter fan fiction I wrote, and for the original Pirates novel I wrote, both of them, the core is freedom. That's what they're fighting for. Now, they fight for it in very different ways with very different aspects, but in the end, the core point of both the stories is finding freedom in their own way, getting rid of what is stopping them from being able to live their lives the way that they want to live them. So with that external pressure and that stake defined, I was then able to go through and shift through internal conflict. So the internal conflict in the fan fiction had a lot to do with trust, because Harry Potter doesn't trust easily. But the internal conflict in the original novel doesn't have a whole lot to do with trust for the character that replaced Harry Potter. Now, that doesn't mean that I really knew that entirely at the start. And as a discovery writer, this is the point where I stop and I say, please remember that none of this is set in stone. None of this is a hard, fast rule. All of this is to get you started and going in your rewrite so that at the end of the rewrite, you don't just have a story that you've changed all of the names and all of the setting description. That's not what we're going for. We're going for a story that has the same core essence of your fan fiction, the reason people loved it as a fan fiction, and then moving it into an original novel that people can also enjoy for the same core reasons. And so don't get hung up on, well, I don't know what the internal conflict is going to be until I know what the new plot is. That's fine. But give yourself an idea of what that core point of the story is when it comes to thinking about the internal conflict of your new character. So freedom was the core point of both stories. Finding freedom is that theme that runs through both stories. And knowing that in my rewrite, I was able to start it with all of the rest of the information, knowing that whatever the internal conflict was for my main character, it needed to revolve around finding freedom. So this is one of those points where it's a guide and not set in stone. It's there to help you get going. And if you're a discovery writer, you will probably discover what this internal conflict is as you're writing. Okay, that was a lot. Let's stop and let's sum it back up. Your first 5 steps in transitioning characters from fan fiction into an original fiction story. Number 1 is you're going to give the source material space. You want to be stepping away from it, not staying as close to it as possible. Number 2, you're going to stay true to the character's soul. So you're going to make sure that you're keeping a similar moral compass, similar motivations and ideals, but you're also making conscious efforts to shift them in ways that will make them different from the fan fiction character you borrowed. Number 3 is you're going to change the past, but not. We're going to create a new backstory, but that backstory still has to logically get us to the exact same place that our new character is in right now. And then number 4 is we're going to define the new strengths and flaws because we've changed backstory, we've changed motivations and things like that a little bit. So now we need to redefine strengths and flaws because those are going to shift as well. And then number 5 is you're going to determine the internal conflict. And remember, that's just to get you started. And it starts with knowing what those external pressures and what the external conflict is doing to the character, because that will help you determine what the internal conflict will be. So I hope this was helpful. If you have questions, please put them down below in the comments. I do come into the comments and I do answer questions. If you don't want to miss the last 5 steps of what we're doing to shift characters from fan fiction into original fiction, then make sure you hit the subscribe button. There's also going to be videos about shifting plot from a fan fiction to an original fiction and shifting setting from a fan fiction to an original fiction. I post videos about once a month, so it is going to take some time. I also post videos about discovery writing, self-publishing on a shoestring budget, cover design, and now on converting your fan fiction into original fiction. I hope to see you again soon.